Yeah, I've already started recording. It's not an issue at all. I mean, we can just edit this out now that I've sort of become like a semi-editor and just edit these things out.
It's like Peter Drucker, you know, have you heard of Peter Drucker?
No.
He's like management guru.
Oh, okay.
Any MBA will learn Peter Drucker on management.
Oh, okay.
He's like the guru.
Right.
Peter Drucker. So he said, around 35, you will know to what level you're going to go in your first career. So say your first career finishes at 50. Then you'll know at 35 to what level, roughly you'll get an idea. You'll know the pecking order, so to speak. You'll never be CEO or something, and you'll know where you're going to be. So after 35, he says, you should start looking at what you will do after 50 or after your first career or after retirement or anything. You should start thinking about what will I do after my first career plateaus, which he says is around 50. And then
it's such an encouraging thing. I mean, I don't know what your takeaway from that was, but I think my takeaway was he's calling 50 years as the end of your first career, which means there are more to come after 50, which is good, right? I mean, it's an encouraging thing to say.
In the sense, he says around 50 is where you'll absolutely plateau. After that, growth as such will not happen. So you'll know, even though you might continue till 58, 60 on your career, you'll never going to go much beyond that level, 50 ke baad. So he says you start thinking. And it's interesting. So I'm saying some things like editing. One of my, you haven't met him, Swaminathan his name is. He was in IT. He did this RPA, robotic process automation, which is not much robos actually, but he did that for a long time, and now he's doing this, as in he's taking filmmaking and social media marketing as a career. So,
which is completely different from what he was
obviously
doing.
And he liked to do this image editing, and he was anyway doing that even in normal. He just now there's freedom to do that as a full-time thing.
Nice.
Yeah, he doesn't need the money, but he'll just do it anyway, right? Similarly, editing, all these things, you're becoming good at this part.
I think the last podcast I managed to bleep out some of her work. Which I mean, for me it's a big achievement. Many people who are used to it.
Sure, and then slowly this might be. Yesterday, that ICICI bank manager came here, and he says, "You guys are doing a studio." I said, "Yeah, you know this. It looks like the studio setup and all." Sure. You can provide studio services for others.
Yeah, maybe. Someday.
Okay, so what do we have in our podcast apart from this, if we are keeping it in this?
I mean, I still think that is an interesting thing to discuss.
But
I was just thinking about this P versus NP.
Means you get up to pee at night or not to pee. last not I was just thinking last night I woke up and drank water, and I was thinking, thank God I'm not at a level where I have to get up and to pee yet. So I'm okay. What about you? Okay. Are you getting up to pee at night?
Okay. I still sometimes. I mean, if I've had too much to drink during the night, then yes. But getting back to the matter
P versus NP.
P versus NP. And I think it means polynomial time versus non-polynomial time. Basically, in plain English, it means can a task be done in a reasonable amount of time, or will it take an unreasonable amount of time to complete?
Right.
And I think tapping into your own skill level at chess, right? Chess is something that is actually very easy to learn, but it's actually very difficult to solve, right? And so I think the P versus NP problem is, can some problems be actually solved, or will they always be open problems? Like the solution to chess, for example. Speaking about chess, did you know that draughts is a solved game? And you know what solved game means? Tic-tac-toe is solved.
Right. Because you
Right?
know there are only
There
fixed
are only fixed distances.
variations.
Yeah, I mean, sure, there are 9 factorial combinations on which the board can exist, right? But then once you place the first piece, you know who's going to win, or it's going to be a draw, or you're going to lose.
By best play,
Yeah,
you
by
know
that-
that.
yeah, you know the sequence in which it's going to happen. So by that definition, it's a solved game. It's the same for draughts as well. It's a solved game. And so with the advent of computers, even in the 80s itself, I think draughts was like a solved game. And so are many of our mathematical problems, right? If you I'll give you an example of that will define what a P versus NP is. Let's say I give you like a 20-digit prime number. In a reasonable amount of time, you can find out if it's actually a prime or not. How will you find out if it's a prime or not? You'll probably write a program, do the divide it until half of that number,
Half could have a square root.
square root of that number, and then you will know that whether it's a prime or not.
Yeah.
Right? However, if I asked you to come up with a 20-digit prime number, can you tell me how long it will take? Right? And I would like to think that at least up until the 80s, this was a clearly NP problem. This wasn't a P problem. This wasn't something that could be solved in polynomial time. But our computing has evolved to such a point right now that something that was NP is now P. Because we can have prime numbers that are 20, 30 digits long. Right? Maybe we should look up how long is the longest prime number we've found.
We can do that.
Yeah, we can do that at a later point in time.
Right.
But you see what the issue. But you can see where this conversation is heading. Problems that we used to think are NP problems are clearly now in the P territory. So if this is like a chart, like a pie chart, the NP. The P portion of that pie chart is slowly growing as our computers are becoming more advanced, as our algorithms advance. So all of those small problems are like, heading over, or we are gobbling up more and more area from the NP territory. We still haven't beaten chess. However, I mean, I think you would agree with me if I said that most computers now will tell you for sure that I think the white definitely wins, correct?
White has an advantage.
White has an advantage, or basically whoever plays first has an advantage, correct?
Slightly.
So you can see that this is the area between P and NP is not black and white. It's slightly grayish at this point. We know that whoever moves first has a higher advantage or has an advantage in winning. So who knows, man? Maybe computers will become advanced enough that we can solve chess, where we can break down every move into a set of formulas or a set of. I don't know how it can be achieved, but yes, I mean, right now it still remains an NP issue, right? An NP problem, a problem that cannot be solved in polynomial time, right? But maybe someday in the future.
So, okay, let's go a little deeper into this issue. Now, when you see what I mean is by solved, see. So, okay, so how do grandmasters play chess is they will ignore the bad moves without even thinking so the bad move won't even come into their minds. Of course, some will and they lose, but why is a grandmaster better than say me or you is because the quality of moves that we consider to be played, they'll consider a smaller portion of that. The worse move won't come into their mind, and maybe a better move will come into their mind. So computer programs now regularly beat grandmasters.
No, wait, hold on. Let's not use the word regularly. 100% of the time they beat grandmasters.
Sure.
I think the FIDE rating for
the latest engine
already is at
3000 plus. Correct.
3000 plus.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. So if they beat all the grandmasters, so now why do you say it is not solved?
Because and by solved I mean take draughts for example. Whoever moves first definitely wins. There is, I mean, if you know what you're doing, it's like tic-tac-toe. If I was playing tic-tac-toe with, let's say, a 2-year-old, he's going to lose because I know. I know how the game ends.
Right.
But I will probably never be able to defeat you. Or if you make like a wrong move, I mean, if you make a bad move, I can 100% win.
Correct.
If I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Draughts is something like that.
Mm.
If you move your pieces correctly, it can definitely be solved. And by solved, I mean all of its moves. I mean, it's basically predictable to such an extent that I know that I'll always win. Right. So once chess gets to a point where if I move first or you move first, where if the opening sequence is well defined, then I can seek that path to always defeat you no matter how hard you try. And in draughts, that's possible. So, once I move first,
right.
I'll always, once I move first, and once you make like one bad move or the path to my victory is assured. It's like that. So chess, we still haven't solved that. Although we are like, like I was saying, we are in that gray territory now where because we've had computers play against each other so many times, we know that the first mover has an advantage, white has an advantage. So, so it's in that gray territory. And chess is not the only thing. There is also Go, which is, I think, a Korean or a Japanese origin, I think Chinese origin board game, which I hear is actually much more complicated than chess.
Right.
And I mean, I think right now it's too early to tell if chess, I mean, if Go also has the same first mover advantage as this thing, because I think we've only had one tournament, just like the Deep Blue tournament that was done with Kasparov. We just had one tournament with like the world's number one Go player, and of course the computer won.
Right.
So I think it's too early to tell if Go is also heading into that solvable territory. But right now Go is like sort of open. It's definitely an NP problem. Whereas chess, I think it's like slowly heading towards that polynomial. Already that creeping thing has.
Right.
Yeah.
So one more question here is now P versus NP. We are saying so purely in terms of taking an algorithm, and we are saying the worst case runtime is P or NP, right?
Yes.
So
yeah.
So where does like things like learning then come in? Are they also, can they be considered that these are algorithms with a worst case runtime, or are they actually? So for example, what I mean is the same example that you gave, the DeepMind algorithm or computer which defeated Lee Sedol. So it had learnt by playing against itself n number of times, right?
Yeah.
Or against somebody. So now we are, because it's an evolving thing. So right. So we can't even say that. So if it had played 10,000 games and then somebody plays against it, it's so you get my thing. It's not pure compute power that is determining how well it will play. If it has played 1,000,000 games, then it becomes stronger. The software becomes stronger.
Yeah.
So it's not just compute time. Whereas P versus NP becomes a purely compute/memory issue, right?
Yeah.
We are generally talking O. So, when we are talking of P versus NP, we are talking O of
the O
something.
complexity. Yeah.
So that's generally a time thing, not even memory. But so it also matters when you had played against that system.
Yeah.
How in its infancy it was. Maybe if it plays 1,000,000 more games, it becomes even stronger, right? And then it's not question of just the so history would matter in that case.
Yeah.
So interesting. Yeah, these are, I think, very interesting questions.
Yeah. So that's and I think
so you're saying basically that we are taking P is taking more from NP.
Yeah, P is like slowly chewing away into NP's territory as our computers become stronger or better, faster, smaller.
Which is why you think that earlier that 128-bit encryption was enough, and now there are, or 64 was enough.
64-bit encryption was enough, and now it's
256,
not
512,
512,
right? We need all that,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Which was also a NP problem,
Which
right?
was exactly
finding out
yes.
prime factors. Is that what
those
it was?
are prime factors. That's
finding
correct. Yeah.
prime factors of a very big number,
of a
right?
very big number. No, I think the very big number itself was just a multiple of 2 primes.
Right.
That's it.
So finding the
factors
means you would break the encryption, right?
So with 64-bit, I think computing. Yeah, I mean, it was at one point in time, I think in the 80s and the 90s, that was like a big deal.
64-bit
and 128-bit.
Yes, came. And
there
now
was
it's
an
all, mostly 256, I think.
Mostly 256, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Compute power grows and...
Yeah. This sort of is a leeway into I would say the divergence between how computers work and how the human mind works.
Yeah.
Right?
I was thinking.
Let's take music for example. Right? How do we find? I'll give you a P versus NP problem that is purely arises out of the human brain, or that purely concerns the human brain. Take music for example. Right? Everybody loves music. Everybody likes some kind of the music or the other. And it's very easy for us to say, yeah, you know what, this is good music, I like it. It's very easy for you to say, yeah, this is not so good music. And
sure.
everything, right? However, it's difficult for the human brain to come up with a good music, which other brains can say this is good music. Right? Wouldn't you say that that's like an NP, a P versus NP issue, because it follows the same pattern where a P versus NP is an NP problem is something that is very difficult to come up with, but it's very easy to crack. In a similar way, music, it's very difficult to come up with, but it's very easy to just look at it and say yeah, and just hear it and say it's a very good piece of music. It's the same with food also, for that matter, right? I mean, it's reasonably difficult to cook well, right? But it's very easy to eat something and say, wow, this is like the best food ever. I would say it's also a similar thing, or it's a similar issue, but it mainly concerns with the human brain, I would say. It's a P versus NP thing, right? For a human brain, at least for my brain, it's very difficult to draw art,
right?
For to draw or to make music, but I can appreciate both of these.
Sure.
I mean, I solve that problem very easily, but it's very difficult for me to come up with that problem.
I see what you're saying.
Right? It seems like it's a similar thing for the human brain. I mean, if we were to take your brain in isolation, right? I mean, it's the same thing, right? I mean, you can easily appreciate art and music and everything, but if you had to come up with something on your own, it would be difficult. It's a P and NP issue that concerns only this thing. There are other brains that can do these things, but not mine. Right? I mean, it seems like a similar issue, and I think that's where computers and humans sort of diverge, right? We are always looking to compete a human brain, one computing system against the other. And we'd like to think, or at least I think the prevailing sentiment is that at some point in time our computers will become conscious of itself. I think this cannot be farther from the truth, because computing seems like it's brute forcing everything. Right? And when you say brute forcing, it means it's solving everything until it's evaluating all positions, it's evaluating all conditions until it finds a single
that's where learning is already different, right? Yeah,
learning is already different. But I'm saying that's not the only brute forcing I'm talking about. Even if you were to sort of improve it with learning or machine learning, as we call it, artificial intelligence, genetic algorithm, it's still sort of brute forcing its way until it finds a solution. There is no true learning that's happening.
No, there is true learning. Why is the deep mind it picked up the rules of the game. right? It didn't even know what the rules of the game were. So it played that Atari video games, right? Without knowing nobody told it what the rules of the game are. So it picked up the rules of the game just by knowing what the end result was. Oh, it did or it did not. So I think learning is happening in these systems.
But these learning and everything, they're still stored as zeros and ones into onto some computer somewhere, whether it's in its hard memory or soft or RAM memory or random memory.
Right.
It's still stored as something, and it still doesn't seem like there is a deep appreciation for learning on behalf of the from the system that is evolved itself.
Appreciation, appreciation is a different concept.
Right?
Whether it learns that.
So see, what I'm saying is that these systems are essentially mimicking human behavior, but I'm not sure if they're actually
able to mimic these kinds of things, like appreciation.
Yeah. Or let me put it in other words. It's possible, I mean, if we break down everything into mathematical formulas or algorithms or genetic learning or machine learning, then I think these things would look as if they are learning, as if they are as if the machines are learning, as if the machines are evolving. But I'm saying there is no understanding that is related to it. And what I mean by understanding is, it feels different when you understand something, right? I mean, as a human, so it's our condition.
Yeah, this question of understanding, I've been thinking about, and actually I don't see any difference. See, as if you can play a good chess move, whether you got some sense of aesthetics or by playing a million moves, you know what is a good move, what is not a good move. I think you have learnt chess. The factor, like you say, that which is I can see or a player can really appreciate, what a good move, right? Or like you said, if I hear a piece of music and I go, wow, whether an computing system can reach that point, and then we would really see probably that it has consciousness. Right now, learning, I think computing systems like DeepMind or anything, they are learning. That is, I have no issue, I think they are learning, and they are learning much better than humans now. But whether they might have these soft aspects of appreciation and what is, right now it plays, right? If you give it something and maybe it rated that move on a factor of 10, then it will also tell what is a good move or a bad move. Because in chess, at least taking chess, evaluating a position is the key, right? So, I think we are not very far away from even factors like appreciation or...
Yeah. So, I'll tell you this one thing that I learned
but like you said, maybe we should keep that as a separate topic than P versus NP. But you're right that P is growing with respect. You were saying?
So I think my point was we've evolved over, I think, 500 million years into the brain structure that we have today.
Sure.
All right? And let me explain to you about this brain structure. So the part of us that was reptiles is still there. I mean, I'm a reptilian, or I think a fish brain. That part is still there.
Right.
Whatever we have grown, we've like sort of grown on top of this. Now, I'm not saying this. This was actually, I think this is how the brain is actually structured. There are actually two brains. One is a lower brain that we call the subconscious, but it's actually sort of when people say it's a subconscious or the subconsciousness, it's actually the lower brain, or like how we evolved from the reptilian brain. All right, let's refer to that. And on top of that is what is actually called as the forebrain. It's the one that is responsible for your thoughts. It's the you part of you. Now, if you've heard of several Hindu, what do you say, schools of thought will tell you that your thought is like a river, and the you part is just looking at that river and picking what you choose and picking what you say. And it truly is like that. You know, what's that guy's name? The guy who said, "I think, therefore I am." Descartes. Descartes said, right? "I think, therefore I am." But I think a more truer way of saying it, or a more better way of saying that, is my thoughts are like a river, and I sort of am a witness to my thoughts. I'm a witness to my thoughts. Let me explain. Everything that you attribute to emotion, right? Emotion. When you feel emotional about something, those are actually base instincts. Those actually arise from the reptilian part of you. Everything, anger, happiness, sadness, whatever emotion, jealousy, enviousness, anxiety, all of those arise from the base part of you. Your forebrain part of it only sort of interprets what that guy is feeling and gives it words and meaning and structure to those base thoughts. All right. Only very abstract thought, things like, Ravi, if you want to get to my house, you need to pass by the yellow house down the black road. And on the left hand side, you'll see a chicken shop, and on the right hand side. So you already form that picture in your head as to where my house is, right? Only those pure abstract thought are actually human thought. Whereas everything that you feel, emotion, all your emotions that you feel are actually coming from the base. Are more.
I'm assuming you're coming back to P versus NP.
I am coming to it. I mean, yeah, I will sort of approach it. All right. I'll give you an example. All right. Let's say we were just eating those cashews, right? And if there was, like, let's say just one cashew left on the table, right? And if I just took the last cashew out of the table and I ate it, how would you feel about it? Would you have? Sure. Let's say you also wanted to eat that last piece. What would you think?
Okay. So assume I'll feel not good. Okay.
Yeah, you'll feel not good.
Okay.
Right. So that feeling of not goodness is not coming from your forebrain. That's actually percolating up from the reptilian part of your brain, which says, you know what, I wanted to eat that. Your forebrain is simply giving words to what your base feelings really are. And at any one point in time, this base brain of yours, this reptilian or this older part of the brain that you have, is still going through a lot of emotions, and your forebrain is simply a witness to those thoughts, or it gives words to those thoughts. Now, I think the point of this whole conversation was your brain is structured differently from a computer. We have the advantage of about 500 million years of evolution. It's a completely different structure in the most surprising of ways. Right? Now, how are you going to replicate this? Or sure, computers are probably learning in exactly the way that we are learning, but is that truly an understanding? Is that truly understanding or realization of what that is? Or, to ask a better question, can learning in one area transcribe into learning into another area?
But that doesn't happen even for humans, right?
That happens for humans.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
Like a flute player, Hari Prasad Chaurasia, won't be able to program a computer, right?
He will not. No. So I'm not. But
any,
to relate
like,
it. Okay, fine. You brought up music again.
Sure.
Have you heard of this term, "not until the fat lady sings"? You've heard of this, right?
Of course.
You know where that term comes from?
No.
In
opera.
In opera.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I don't know.
So in
the
opera,
relating.
So there used to be this main program that will happen, but at the very end, always at the end of the opera, there would be this lady,
fat lady who would sing.
The fat lady who would sing. All right. Now, what would happen is that people who were not in the know would actually, when the main event is over, they would like sort of get up and start leaving, only to realize that there's somebody else on stage, and they have started to sing. So that's where the whole thing came about. Not until the fat lady sings.
Okay.
That now that you understand. You understand that the end of the program is when the fat lady sings. You can easily apply that learning to something else also. This war is not over until the fat lady sings.
No.
Do you know what I mean?
No.
What do I mean by saying this podcast is not over until the fat lady sings? What does that mean?
No. This is, you can't say this is the. No. This is like a very I can feed this same rule into a computer and it will understand that it is not over.
Yeah,
right?
it's not over. I mean, this podcast is not
But
over.
But that a computing system will understand that. How are you saying it won't? It's just a rule saying that if this phrase comes, that means main thing is not over. Why do you say it's not like that? As in, so.
But that is just mimicking the. But that's just mimicking.
And that's what I am saying. Exactly. So this same question is something I am. So understanding that what is, when we say, I have understood, what is it that is happening, right? Yeah. So what is it you think? You want to distinguish between learning and understanding, right?
Learning and understanding. Yes.
What is difference? So you tell me what is the difference, because I am very interested.
I think the difference is it's how easily we are able to do this. That one thing. Is I can apply the same rules of logic to the other. And I can be guaranteed,
there is no other.
I can be guaranteed that the other mind will understand it.
No. See, if a human has learned to play flute very well, say Hari Prasad Chaurasia, when he was a young man, he played at a certain level. Maybe he knew the notes very well, but he didn't have that deep understanding of music. And maybe he was not translating whatever people say. It's just not knowing the 7 notes. So as he progressed in life, he made better and better music which people connected to, right? So if you say so I will say that Hari Prasad Chaurasia knows how to play the flute, but that's all he knows.
Right.
He doesn't know anything else. Maybe not even tabla, for instance, or even harmonium, even another instrument, he doesn't know.
But if Hari Prasad Chaurasia was to study physics,
he won't know.
Hold on. What are you talking about?
He'll not know anything. He'll be as bad as me. So, for instance, or if he as good as me.
Hold on. If he was to study physics, wouldn't he notice all of the music? Wouldn't he notice the harmony in the universe? I think that was one of the points that Richard Feynman also brought up. He was actually very, he was a violin player, and I think he was saying that my playing music is what has enhanced my understanding of the universe, and he saw the harmony in the universe. So Hari Prasad Chaurasia doesn't have to sit and program, but he can sit and understand the harmony of physics. I mean, I think just last week we were talking about the square, the inverse square law, 1 by distance squared. Sure. And we saw, how all of the formulas are sort of looking similar to that. Even gravitation is what G by mm.
Very nice. Yeah. And I think all of these are pattern recognitions. So humans are pattern recognition.
Exactly. We are excellent pattern recognition.
So even computers are, I would say. You just have to program them. And learning algorithms are doing that. You don't even tell them what the rules are of chess, and it is figured what to do, how to move the pieces. So it's recognized pattern. How is it able to beat Go player, which is very abstract pattern recognition, much more. So it's able to beat. So it has learnt, and I don't think there is any difference in its understanding of the game and Lee Sedol's understanding. Maybe Lee Sedol, it considers much more, right? The computer. But AlphaGo, as a matter of fact, I know that it versus Stockfish, for example, it considers even lesser moves or considers different moves. So people say that the alpha mind which is playing, or Leela is playing human-like chess moves, and so experts are able to figure out what is a human-like move and what is an engine-like move, right? So it's playing human-like moves. So based on maybe it has seen more human moves, so it is playing. It's like a child which has seen games, and it's able to replicate. So I don't see any difference actually in learning. In appreciation, I don't know yet. But I think learning, it's all the same. There is no difference. or maybe they are better, as in.
Yeah. If you take, just to add one last point, right? A chess player would easily be able to look at a battle map and would be able to say, how the pieces should move, or would be able to appreciate how complex an actual battlefield or whatever it is. And when I said
but that is because chess is
transcribing one learning into another.
No, it's not. That's what I'm saying. It's not. No, because
you're saying it's just simple pattern matching.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
No, that's because chess is at some level a battle game, right? So you should not compare it to say battle map. So if you say a chess player can as easily do space physics.
Of course not. No, it's not. No. I never said it's like completely like that. I'm saying in an area that is very closely related, you can like very easily transcribe this learning. Are computers able to do that? Will an AlphaGo mind,
so the
come up with some prophetic proverbs or quotes that can be applied to a battlefield?
Apparently, the GPT-3 is bringing out academic papers which humans are not able to distinguish, right? Full papers is taken out by an NLP system, and humans are not able to distinguish what is brought out by an NLP machine and what is brought out by a human, right? So that is the level we are at right now of producing also, generating. So
no, look, I think the point of this entire discussion, at least for the last 10 minutes, was I'm not here to say no, the human mind is like far more better than the computer. No, I completely appreciate how powerful computers have become. I appreciate it. All right. However, my anxiety is that we are perhaps going in the wrong direction with transistor technology, with the processor technology that we have. Maybe we need to re-evolve computers, come up with some other architecture other than just brute forcing everything with algorithms or otherwise. Is what my feeling is. Maybe we should look at how a brain actually works, and how we have actually two computers inside the same brain, and how they compete against each other to make you as you, right?
Yeah, but the question is, are they helping in learning something? Is the reptilian brain in me helping me? So the question of motivation, right? A student has to study something. Is the reptilian brain in him helping him study or making it worse? So suppose there is a distraction, the reptilian brain is saying, let me go and do that. Right?
Yeah.
Whereas he has to study, isn't it?
Yes.
So the question is there if you say that we should look at this model and try to replicate, I'm not
you
so
know
sure.
what? Just as you said that, it just struck me. Most of our space rockets generally have one or more computers, and each one of these computers have to agree with each other for a specific input. Sorry about that. I should have kept it on mute, but that's fine. Oh, damn it! All right. So most of our most of our rocket computers, they have many different redundant systems in them, and they all have to agree with each other before making an input to a system or something. So we might already be heading in that direction, but I think if we deliberately move in that direction, where we have multiple computers competing against each other, I think then you'll have like a complete...
No. I have to disagree that. Multiple computers doesn't mean that one is having a paradigm of a reptile and one is a paradigm of a forebrain. Right now, all of us are all the computers, that is all neural nets, right? Like a forebrain thing. And that's being mimicked, and that's great for learning, I would say. I would say the reptilian part is actually... maybe unless it's harnessed. Okay, again, I'm not an expert, but for normal people, I think the reptilian brain actually
that's
inhibits the learning, or
definitely, because it basically doesn't want to do anything, because it evolved from a very right? From the need to conserve energy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it basically evolved from a need to conserve energy, it doesn't want to expend energy as quickly as
Very
possible.
true, very true.
So maybe you do need to. No, I'm not saying that it necessarily has to be a reptilian brain or a lower evolved brain that doesn't want to do anything. I'm saying this model of different brains coming together. I think the whole point was you're probably not heading in the right direction as far as. Or here's the thing. Yes, there is a computer today that has defeated Lee Sedol, AlphaGo, and DeepMind and Blue Chess or whatever, right? But are you having a conversation with a computer or with having a conversation with another brain?
You never
How
know.
long?
You never know. In fact, I'm saying.
How long before we are able to have a conversation like this with another computer?
I'm saying
philosophical questions.
And I'm saying right now, see, like I was saying, right, the academic papers are presented with the fluency or with the structure and the fluency that humans cannot distinguish. You remember that famous ELIZA, right?
Yeah, ELIZA,
right?
Yeah.
And I think now, if a real good, like something like with GPT-3 and all, I think humans will really not be able to distinguish between what they're interacting with at the other end. I think so. I think that's not going to be very different at all with the level these guys are. Yeah, I actually. so what happens is humans will make, like you said, make meaning from interactions, right? So I have my map, my internal thing, and when you say something, I understand or try to make sense of what you're saying based on my map. So if I come across an artificially intelligent humanoid, then I think with the current, maybe at the earlier I would say, oh, there's something suspicious. With the current language, I don't know, maybe they'll even replicate things like emotion or right? Possible.
Yeah.
So my point from all this was understanding, which I thought was really different from neural nets or humans. I think it's not very different at all. I think finally it's pattern recognition at different level. Like you said, the harmony, that part is just a deeper understanding of some pattern, right? And I totally agree with you that Hari Prasad has probably a better idea of what is harmony than most people, say even me, right? Harmony. So he might be able to appreciate harmony better, and that's because he's just seen so many more patterns, I think.
Yeah, this was a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, we should do more.
I love it when we bounce off each other like this.
Right? I think this whole the machine human is interesting to most people conversation, so we should know more and try to see what is happening. Very interesting. Yeah,
we will end this segment now.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to the next segment.
Long.
Damn.
That's what happens. We totally unscripted.
There's the camera.
That's what will happen.
Yeah. What do you think of this entire conversation? Leave a comment below. Let us know.
Yep.
We'd really appreciate your feedback or your suggestions.
I still haven't gotten used to looking there. I still look at the screen.
Yeah.
So strange. Yeah.
Let's move on to the next segment. Yeah. So I think last podcast we sort of looked at just the introduction of this Therac 25 computers related issue. In every podcast we have like a historical issue, computing related issue, and I think this week I thought we'll just look at this Therac 25 issue. Alright, let's read the crux of the issue itself. Right? It was involved in at least 6 accidents between 1985 and 87 in which patients were given massive overdoses of radiation. Because of concurrent programming errors, also known as race conditions, it sometimes gave the patients radiation doses that were hundreds of times greater than normal, resulting in death or serious injury.
Sad.
So a radiation machine, right? I mean, I don't know what it looked like in 1985 to 87, but let's assume that it looks like this and it's like controlled by a computer.
Yeah.
So what would happen is that you would have an operator come in and type in the radiation dose that you should receive, for the type of cancer that you have. And so the what's that called? The actual radioactive element would be stored inside of a leaded container, and it would be hidden through it would
Aperture,
an
kind of.
aperture, and then this aperture would sort of open and then close, giving you the exact radiation dose that had been entered by the operator. Now these radiation doses are different for different patients. The crux of the problem was that the programmer had not considered race conditions, and I'm not sure if newer programmers would know what race conditions are, but all operating systems basically handle it very efficiently. Some older programmers will remember opening up, how slow their desktop computers were.
Right.
I still remember mine. So I used to know the exact sequence of keys to hit to open Microsoft Word, enter the first two sentences to sort of start with the document, and the computer would have not caught up with whatever background processing it is doing. But at the end of it, you could see that it would still sort of open start menu, go to Microsoft Word, open the document, and then type out all of the sentences as if it was doing automatically. But basically what had happened was it would queue up whatever input that it was receiving from the keyboard and then sort of play them in the sequence that I had entered, never missing a key that I had entered. And this is called as handling race conditions, right? As far as keyboard input is concerned, I mean there are other threads and processes based race conditions also one must handle. But I think the problem with this Therac 25 was that they did not handle it, and it caused a lot of issues. I think I'm not sure how many people died, but there were at least 6 incidences that caused this to happen. And here is the crux of the problem. One failure occurred when a particular sequence of keystrokes was entered on the VT100 terminal, which controlled the PDP-11 computer. The operators were to press X, select the 25 million electron volts mode, use the cursor up, edit the input to E, select 25 MeV electron mode, and then press enter, all within 8 seconds of the first key press, well within the capability of the experienced user of the machine. So they had not considered that it takes time for a learner to look at a document, type in the exact sequence, but once you are used to down the line, once you are used to it, you just do this and then assume that the computer is going to do it right. What they did not know was that the first 6 keys that you had entered, it had just simply forgotten, and it would just only do the last key that you had entered, which probably opened that aperture more than it was required. So it's a very this is one of those instances where bad programming or bad architecture design led to deaths. This is one. I'm sure there are more, but this is one of them.
Sure.
I think there's one more. I mean, this is
sad,
one,
no?
and even the Boeing 787. I think that also was like a software issue, but this is one. So, if you are in the field of medical. If you are in the medical field or anything, if you're writing software for that,
nice to
doubly,
know.
You should be doubly careful.
I think now there'll be little more, but you never know what issues go on now.
Look at this. Look at this last sentence. In response to incidences like those associated with the Therac 25, the IEC 62304 standard was created, which introduced development lifecycle standards for medical device software and specific guidance on using software with unknown pedigree.
Very interesting.
I mean, I think they use this because of this one. A naive assumption is often made that reusing software or using commercial off-the-shelf software will increase safety because the software will have been exercised extensively. So, there's a lesson to be learned over here ultimately, I think. I think that's all I had for this week. I think this was great, right? Yeah. Just what did you think of this conversation? Would you like to add something to this conversation?
Absolutely, I'm sure they should add something. Write down in the comments.
Please do write down in the comments. If you haven't subscribed, do subscribe and tell your friends about it. Bye bye.
Ciao.
See you next week.